Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Khalqi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Alright, so last class we finished on this problem that Imam al-Ghazali brought with regards to the Qudrah of Allah. And we talked in detail about whether it's possible for human beings to be creators of our own actions, or if Allah is the creator of all actions. And if Allah is the creator of all actions, then how is it possible that we still have the ability to do certain things? Do we actually have the ability, or are we forced? Do we have a free will? What are we rewarded by if we're not judged by only our actions, etc.? We went into that in quite some detail. So inshallah, all of that is clear. If there's any issues with that, then make sure to ask questions regarding that, and I'll try my best to answer, inshallah. With regards to today's class, Imam al-Ghazali is finishing off the chapter of Al-Qudrah. He's finishing off the chapter of Allah's power, and he brings one last issue that some people might try to use against Ahlus Sunnah statement. So first of all, what is Ahlus Sunnah statement? It is that Allah has divine and complete power over all things that He's created. Okay, so what does this include? This includes every action that we do, everything that we can see around us, and the effects of everything within creation, such as when we see a fire burn a piece of paper. The effect that comes as a result of the fire touching the paper, we say this is all to do with the creation of Allah. Okay, so now he says, another argument that some people might try and say is what's known as Tawallud. Tawallud comes from the root letters of Waw, Lam, and Dal, right? Walad, which is an offspring. Okay, as we know in Surah al-Ikhlas, Allah says what? قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ. Yalid comes from walada yalidu, right? And walada yalidu means to give off an offspring. And then the passive form of this verb would be yulad. Yulad, instead of yalid means to give off an offspring. Yulad means to be given off as an offspring. So that's what this meaning is in this verse of the Quran, that Allah is not, He doesn't give off offspring, nor was He one that was given off as an offspring of somebody else. So looking at this root word that comes from walada, which is to give off an offspring, came this terminology that some people use, such as the Mu'tazila. It's a Mu'tazili belief that this doctrine of Tawallud is how most of the effects that we see in creation exist. So what is Tawallud? One example I'll give is, if I was to, for example, take my hand and my other hand and I would hit my hand. The question is, we as human beings, we can feel pain, right? So after I hit my hand like this, or you know what, since I'm saying my hand, so I don't want it to get confusing. Okay, just because I don't have something that I can give the example with. If I make a fist, so I'll use fist and I'll use my hand. So now I have my fist, and what I do with my hand is I hit my fist. Now I feel some pain on my fist, and that stays for a few seconds. Okay, and maybe if you take a cut and you cut someone, all right, or you cut yourself. Let's not say we cut someone. Let's say you cut yourself, right? And there's pain there that stays for minutes and hours and days, etc., etc. So now the question is, okay, initially that pain came as a result of my hand hitting my fist. But when my hand is no longer touching my fist and I hit it, but my hand is gone, maybe someone chopped off my hand, maybe my hand is not here, etc. It's no longer here. Now we just have my hand, yet there's still some pain there. So the question is, where's this pain coming from, right? Because the initial sense of pain that we had was when I hit. I feel the pain initially, but after I finished hitting, how is it possible that we're saying my hand is still hurting? How is the pain still there? So they say this is something called Tawallud. Tawallud means that the initial hit of my hand, the initial contact of my hand to my fist, caused such a reaction, okay, that from that initial movement of my hand, that initial contact, it gave off an offspring of pain. And that pain gave off an offspring of, it's a literal translation to say gave off an offspring, but essentially it bred or brought into existence or brought about the existence of something else. So after the initial hit, that brought about pain that stayed in my hand. And then that pain brought about more pain that stayed in my hand. Now, it's known that a'rad or accidents, they don't last more than one period of time. So they're saying that each a'rad, each accident is bringing about another accident of a lesser degree of pain. So if I hit, the first hit of my fist is going to hurt the most. And then at the second moment of time, that accident is going to bring about another accident of less degree pain. And that accident of lesser degree pain is going to bring about another accident that has a lesser degree of pain slowly, so that over time, over the next few seconds or few minutes or whatever, the pain decreases and decreases and decreases until until that last accident can no longer bring about another accident. This is the idea of what they're titling as Tawallud. So then they say, okay, this idea of Tawallud is not by the creation of Allah, because it's known by necessity that this pain only exists in my fist because of this hit. If it wasn't for that hit, the pain wouldn't exist. Okay, that's one example. Another example would be something like Imam alGhazali brings in, he says, if you have a cup and that cup is full of water, and you take your hand and you put your hand inside of the water, by necessity of you putting your hand in the water is going to move. So he says that this water moving, it doesn't just come about just because, right? The water moving out the way only comes because your hand or your finger was inserted inside of the water. Otherwise, the water wouldn't move, right? So they say that the movement of your hand into this position or into this place of the cup of water, it brought about the movement of the water. So he's saying that the accident of movement brought about another accident of movement, and these two accidents exist in different places. So the accident of movement in my finger brought about and created essentially the accident of the movement that exists in the water. So when I put my hand in water, the water begins to move. Now he says that another example is if you have a ring on your finger, right? I don't have a ring to give the example with, but if you have a ring on your finger and then you move your finger, your ring by necessity has to move with your finger, right? There's no way that you can move your finger, but the ring stays in its exact position. No, it has to move with your finger. So they say the movement of your finger that has the ring on it, it brings about the movement of the ring. Whereas if it wasn't for the movement of your finger, the ring wouldn't be moving, right? So the movement of the ring is only there because the movement of your finger. So they say that it's very clear that the movement of the finger is what brings about and does this tawallud, this, bearing an offspring literally, or bringing about something. It brings about this other accident that we see in creation. Okay, so this is the philosophy behind it. Then Imam alGhazali, he begins his response. Okay, and he says, number one, you have to understand what does it mean when we say this word tawallud. Tawallud, that I've just described and explained, that something is brought about from something else. He says the only way we understand this is when you have the essence of something bring about the essence of another thing. Such as if you have a little seed and that seed turns into a tree, right? So you have the little seed and then it sprouts, and from the very existence and the essence of that seed comes something that is double its size, triple its size, bigger, until it becomes this huge tree. So that's called giving birth, or giving an offspring, or creating an offspring, or being brought about as a result of this thing. Make sense? That's one example. The other example he says is like an infant comes out of the womb of the mother, right? So it comes from inside, and it's essentially created inside, and it comes out. Now he says accidents, these attributes like movement and stillness and color and things like this, they don't have a physical existence, such that another physical entity can come out of it to begin with. Okay, so now if an accident doesn't have a physical place or physical existence, how can you say that the accident brought about another accident? Okay, how can you say that because we said that this bringing about can only happen for something that has some physical existence, that very essence of that thing brought about something else that came from inside of it, okay, came from within it, came from part of it. So he says an accident, it doesn't have something that, was inside of the accident and stuff like this, as in it's some type of a physical entity. So how can it be giving off or creating some type of an offspring or something coming out from it? So he says this is something that is impossible. Question. So if someone asks us what exists without a physical location, we can say that accidents don't. No, you say that accidents on their own, in theory, would exist without a location, a physical location. However, is it Imam alGhazali? Yeah, I think Imam alGhazali brings it that I think Imam al-Kamal ibn al-Humam in al-Musayara, he explains that these arad, or actually no, Imam al-Ghazali also mentions it. I remember we talked about it a little bit before, but we didn't go into detail on it. I kind of just mentioned it, which is that accidents, they have a location, but that location is due to them having to exist within a physical being, and the physical thing has a location. Okay, so in order for us to see an accident, it has to have a location. But just if you were to just give the tasawwur, the mafhum, the understanding of what an accident is, that is something that does not have a location. Like if I was to ask you to understand that the color blue is an accident, and I explain to you, right, the color blue being an accident, you can only imagine the color blue on something physical, so it would have a location, right? But before it exists with a physical thing, when you just understand colors, movement, stillness, right, things like this, then that is something that exists that has no location. Okay, but in order for it to, exist in our real world, it has to exist on something physical, and physical things have to have a location. So by way of following, it's called tabi'iyya in Arabic. Bit tabi'iyya, it has a location. By way of following something else, it has a location. So by way of it having to exist within something physical, we say that it has a location. Make sense? Okay. All right. So, okay. So what were we saying with regards? So this whole idea of tawallud, giving off an offspring or giving, causing, I don't want to say causing in the effect of something, something coming out from the very essence of something else. He says with regards to accidents, this is not the case. This can't be the case, because accidents in and of themselves, they don't have a physical existence in and of themselves that something could come from within the accident and bring about a new accident. Okay. So he says that's number one. So he says, where does he say this? فحركة الخاتم إذا لم تكن كامنة في ذات حركة اليد فما معنى تولدها منه. So he's saying that the movement of the ring, right, if it was not, essentially, if that movement of that ring did not exist within the movement of the hand, of a person's hand, then what does it mean that the movement of the ring came as a result of the movement of the hand? Okay, so you have the movement of this ring, and what do they say? They say the movement of the ring only comes about because the hand moved. In other words, the hand brought about the hand's movement, the accident of the hand's movement brought about the existence of a new accident, which is movement of the ring. So he says, if this is not what is meant, then what does it mean to say that it came as a result of that? It was tawallud from it. It was born from it. Okay. And then he says that, he says, some people will try and say, to respond to this, that this is something that is just known. We see it. You can see the hand moving. So by default of seeing the hand move, you see the ring move as well. So this is shown. We can clearly see that the hand is what's causing the ring to move. So the hand is clearly making or forcefully having that effect. Same thing with the example of the glass of water. When you see your finger be put inside the glass of water, you see the water move. So by us observing, by observation, we can see that the hand's movement is what caused the new movement of the water. So he says it's obvious. This is what somebody could try and say. He says, rather, this is not the case. It's not obvious that we see that the hand's movement, or that that one accident is creating another accident, or that one accident comes as a result from another accident. He says all we see is the two things existing together. In reality, all we see is, when we see our hand put in water, all we see is the movement of the hand, and we see the movement of water. But who's to say that these two exist, as in one has to come as a result of the other? Okay. When we see a hand moving, we are seeing the accident subsisting in the hand, correct? Right. Okay. So now Imam al-Ghazali is talking about what we see in existence when we're observing. Because what did they say? They say it's known through observation that you can see that the movement of the hand is creating the movement of the water. Okay. So he says that no, you can't actually see this. All we see is that the water moves after the hand moves. Okay. So now when you see two things happen correspondingly, they can have a two-way relationship. It could either be that these two are, one is lazim for the other, okay? One is necessitated from the other, but that is not aqli, meaning intellectually it's not necessary for one thing to happen. But because of the laws of nature, and because of what we see recurring over and over and over, we observe this thing, we rule that it is necessary for this thing to come about when this thing touches it, or when the two come together. For example, what we explained before with regards to fire. If I lit a fire and I put a paper in the fire, what we have observed is that the fire, when it touches paper, the paper turns into ash. That's what happens, right? Every single time you put a paper on a fire, it burns. That's what's always going to happen. So because of this repetition, and again, this is not intellectual, this is just observation and repetition. We know and we can rule that it is necessary for a fire to, or for a piece of paper to turn to ash when it's put under fire. It's a law that we can deduce, and we can say that it's naturally necessary or scientifically necessary, right? So he said this is one relationship that two things that are observed existing together. This is one relationship we can have. The other relationship is an intellectual necessity. And this is what's known as shart and mashrut. Shart and mashrut is the condition and that which is conditioned. Okay. So for example, a condition for an accident, because of what we understand as an accident, the condition for an accident to be to exist is that it has to exist within a jawhar. Okay, it has to subsist in a particle or an essence. Okay, otherwise you can't have an accident that just exists by itself and doesn't have a place that it exists in. For example, the color blue. If I said the color blue, we know that that's something that actually exists because we see it on products, on objects, right? So you know the color is something that exists. But if I just say that word and I don't give you something physical to imagine the color blue on, you're not going to know what it is. You're not going to know what I'm talking about. You're not going to understand the color blue unless you understand it or imagine that the color blue is on something physical. Okay. If I tried to ask you, imagine the color blue without any physical thing, you wouldn't be able to do it. Why? Because it is an intellectual condition for an accident to exist, that it has to exist and subsist within a particle. Okay. So now the question is, in order for the accident to exist, it has a condition. That condition is the existence of a particle. If that particle doesn't exist, can the accident exist? No. If that particle does exist, is it possible for the accident to now exist? Yes. Why? Because the accident is because the particle is a condition for the accident's existence. Likewise, it goes the opposite. In order for a physical thing to come into existence, it has to have an accident. The minimal accident that every physical thing has to have is the accident of movement or stillness. Okay, so if you have to have the accident of movement or stillness on a physical thing, can a physical thing exist that is neither moving nor still? No. So the condition of this physical thing is that it has to have one of these accidents with it. Meaning if the accident of movement or stillness did not exist, there's no such thing as a physical thing. Excuse me. Okay, so now if this is understood, then Imam alGhazali, he basically says, he explains the difference between these two. And he says to answer their question or their doubt that they bring when they say that you have a cup of water and a person puts his finger inside, and after he puts the finger inside, it moves the water around. He says this is something that is a condition and the thing that is conditioned. Okay, so the reason why by necessity the water has to move in order for the hand to be inside the water is because it's a rational necessity. In order for Allah to create the physical of something in a specific place, that place has to be free. And there has to be a free space that this physical thing can occupy. Okay. If there was no free space, like for example, my hand, okay, my finger cannot exist inside of my hand because the space that my hand over here takes up, this space right here, okay, this space right here is being taken up by my hand. So now if I want my other finger to exist in that place, it can't happen because that space is not free. Make sense? So now in order for my hand to exist there, that space has to be free. If it's not free, my finger cannot exist in that place. So he says if you have a cup of water and you put your hand inside of it, it's obvious that the water is going to move because when Allah is creating your hand or your finger in a specific place, that place has to be free. So when you put your finger inside of the water, it frees up the space. In order to free up some space that was previously taken by something physical, that physical thing has to move its location such that the space can become freed. So now if my hand is over here and I want my finger to exist in this exact spot that my hand is in, I have to now move my hand such that my finger can be there. Okay. If I don't move my hand, my finger can never go in that spot because that spot is not free. Make sense? So no matter how much I want to try and say this is possible, it's not possible, right? Intellectually, which means that this is something that Allah is not, his power is not connected to this type of a thing, right? Meaning, no matter how much you try and put this finger inside of this hand or in this exact place, it is impossible to happen. Okay, my finger cannot go through it or inside of it in this type of a way. Why? Because number one, obviously, we're not saying that it's impossible for two physical things to penetrate each other. Obviously, that is possible, right? Because it depends on the matter of this thing. Okay, so but if there are two things made up of the exact same matter, like my skin over here and my skin over here, then this will never be able to penetrate in a way that the particles that make up my finger take up the exact same space of the particles that are making up my hand at the exact same time, because this would necessitate what? That there's two existences or two particles existing in the exact same place at the same time, and that's something that's rationally impossible. So he's saying that in order for, he says the reason why it's necessary that water has to move when you put your finger inside of the water. Why do you see that the water moves, right? Because if Allah is going to create your hand and the position and the place of your hand being inside of that water, what that means is that he has to free up the space that water is taking currently. Currently, the water takes up a certain space. If your hand goes inside of it, it has to free up that space such that your hand can occupy that space that the water previously took. If that space has to be freed up, it means that the water has to now occupy a new space, which necessitates movement, because all movement is when the particles of something change the space that they occupy to another space. That's what it means to say something is moving, right? So if you say that the water moves because of the hand, it's not the hand that's creating or that's bringing about the movement of the water. as in the attribute of the movement of my hand is now stirring about the new attribute of the water moving. What is actually happening here is the condition of the existence of your finger in this place being fulfilled. What is that condition? That when you want to put something physical somewhere, the space has to be free. Okay, so if you want to put your hand inside of the water, there has to be free space for your hand to be inside the water. And if there has to be free space, that water previously took up all of it, then that water has to free up that space. In other words, it has to move to a different location. What does it mean when it moves to a different location? It moves. So all that's happening here really is you see two things happen, right? You see the hand going inside, and because of the finger, the water moves. You see these two things happen, but the relationship between these two events is the relationship between a condition and that which is conditioned. And it's not that the condition creates that which is conditioned. Okay, so like if we said, for example, it's a condition for an accident to exist. The condition for an accident to exist is that there has to be a substance. There has to be something physical that the accident can exist upon, right, or within, right? That doesn't mean now that because the particle is the condition, it means the particle creates the accident. No, right? The condition doesn't create or bring about that which is conditioned. So he says, when you put your hand inside the water, the relationship between these two is a conditional relationship, right? It's a condition that the water has to move if the finger is going to go inside. So if that's the case, and it's a condition relationship, then we're not saying that the movement of my hand is what created or brought about the movement of the water. Rather, it's simply a condition for the other. One cannot exist without the other. Make sense? So hopefully all of this is clear. Okay. If there's any questions about what has just been explained, then let me know. Okay. He says, okay, if somebody comes now and they argue saying that, okay, this idea of what we previously explained about the accident of movement bringing about a new accident, he says, no. They're not arguing for this because this is nonsense. Well, obviously, an accident doesn't bring about and create another accident. But what we mean is that بل نعني به وجود موجود عقيب موجود وكونه موجودا أو حادثا به. Okay. فالحادث نسميه متولدا والذي به الحدوث نسميه مولدا. So what is he saying? He says what they actually mean. Some of them, what they'll try and argue, what we actually mean by this thing came about because of this. All it means is similar to kind of, we can say, the relationship of one being the cause or a reason for something else. As in, instead of saying that the movement of the water came from the movement of the hand, as in the movement has some place and inside of it was a secret treasury called movement of water, such that now if that movement goes into water, then it puts out. He's saying that's not what they mean. What they mean is to say that when you have two existences and one existence comes after the other existence in a way that existence would not come if not for the first one. Okay, so similar to what we just explained with the water and the movement, right? The movement of the water with the finger inside. He says you have the existence of the movement of your hand. It goes inside of the water, and now you have the existence of the movement of the water. Okay, so you have the existence of water moving coming after the existence of the hand moving. But condition for this, not just one thing happening after another, because there can be many things that happen after one another, but there's no relationship between them. He's saying the condition for this, according to this understanding, right? The condition for these two things happening one after the other is that one of them happens because of the other one. As in, it wouldn't happen if it was not for that. So now the water that's inside this cup, it's still. It would never be unstill, okay? It would never be unstill if I didn't put my hand inside. So now, because I put my hand inside the water, now this existence of the movement of water comes into effect, comes into existence, okay? So he says that this is what it means, that وَكَوْنَهُ مَوْجُودًا أَوْ حَادِثًا بِهِ. It comes into existence as a result of that actual thing. Okay. So he says, if this is what they say that they mean, then this is even more nonsensical. Why? Because previously we spoke about what? We spoke about Allah's power and the power of contingent beings, or contingent power. Okay. And we said that a contingent power, or the ability of a contingent thing, Qudrah haditha, right, is what we explained in the previous lesson, which is what we said, غير مؤثرة, that the power or the ability that we as human beings have is not one that is able to put something into existence. Why can it not put something into existence? Because of the contradictions that we discussed and explained in the previous lesson. Excuse me. So he says, if you say that, if we're saying that somebody's ability to do something, someone's qudrah, someone's power, because it's contingent, it doesn't have the ability to create something else out of nothing. He says, if that's to do with power itself, what about something that doesn't even have any power to begin with? So he says, the movement of my hand, is the movement of my hand, or is it power? Right? The accident that we're talking about, this attribute, this arad, are we talking about the movement of my hand, or are we talking about some type of power that the movement of my hand possesses? Now, nobody says that accidents possess power. Okay? Nor do they say that accidents possess things like knowledge, and accidents possess will. Why? Because in relation to human beings, those themselves are accidents, and accidents cannot subsist within another accident. To further explain this, as in with human beings, our knowledge, right, is an accident in relation to us. Okay, it's an attribute, we can say. Okay, but it's an accident because when it's in relation to us, it's an accident because we have a starting point. Okay, whereas with relation to Allah, we call it an attribute, not an accident. Okay, but Imam alGhazali, he explained, we went through this in the previous one of the previous lessons. He said that if a person means by accident an actual attribute that has no beginning and things like this, then it's okay to say this for Allah, to use this word. Okay, so it has to be understood what we're referring to when we say accident and attribute. So now, when I use this and I'm explaining, if I say accident, I'm referring to things that have a beginning. If I say attribute, I'm referring to Allah's attributes that have no beginning. Okay, so now with us, things like our knowledge, that itself is an accident. Movement is also an accident. So now, if we said that, so same thing with power. Human beings' power, our ability, is an accident in relation to us. So now, if created contingent power is an accident, and the movement of a physical object is also an accident, is it possible to say that the movement has power, as in that the accident of power subsists within the accident of movement, which subsists within the physical of my hand? He says this is impossible. You can't say that an accident subsists within an accident. And we went through this as well in detail in one of the very early on lessons, showing that this would lead to an infinite regress. Okay, so review the lesson in which we spoke about this, if you need to review the evidence for this. But essentially, towards the result of this evidence, or the result of this claim that an accident can subsist within an accident, is it leads to an infinite regress, and this is rationally impossible. Okay, so now he says that when these people are saying that the movement of my hand caused and created the movement of the water, not in the sense that the movement of my hand had a physical thing and inside of it was the movement of water and it sprung forth like that, right? Similar to how inside of a little seed is the roots of the entire tree, right? And it comes from within that thing. So he's saying not like that. What they mean is that it just caused this effect. He says, okay, forget right now what we're talking about with regards to the movement of something causing. Go back to the very accident of power itself. when we talked about the accident of power that has a beginning and is created or is contingent, right? We said and we established that that attribute or that accident of power cannot bring about the existence of something or create something out of nothing. Okay. And we detailed this in the last class. This is why human beings, despite our ability over our actions, despite our power, we're unable to create our actions. We're unable to create everything. Like what I said, I gave the example of eating food. When you put food down your mouth, you don't even know all the things that are going on in the inside of your body. How can it be said that you're creating the feeling of your hunger being satiated, right? Or your thirst quenching? Or for example, when somebody works out and they're lifting weights, and then their muscles, the tissue gets ripped, and then it rebuilds or regrows, and then you become stronger. They say that I did that and I made myself strong, I made myself big, but in reality they didn't do anything, right? They didn't create anything, because their power is incapable of creating something or bringing something into existence. So now he says, if that's what we said about created power, as in the accident of power that has a beginning, that is contingent, right, with relation to ourselves. If that's what we say about that, then what about another attribute that is nothing to do with power to begin with? So he says, the movement of my hand causing the effect of the movement of something else and bringing into existence the movement of the water, that doesn't make any sense. Because the movement of my hand, the accident that's there is movement. The accident is not even power. So he's saying it would be more sensical to say that, okay, this person's created power created that effect, like the Mu'tazila say, right? This person's contingent power created that effect. But to say that an accident that is not even created power to begin with, it's the accident of movement, that accident is creating something, he said that doesn't even make any sense at all. So he says, if that is a lesser degree than created power bringing into existence something, and created power or contingent power cannot bring something into existence, then by default, because this is at a lesser degree, by default, this movement, by default, this accident of movement also cannot bring something into power, into existence. Make sense? So he basically compares what we discussed yesterday to what they're discussing today. Okay. And the comparison is to show that if what we talked about yesterday in the last class, if what we talked about in the last class is impossible, and that is related to the actual attribute by which it should be the most possible, which is power, the accident of power, right? If it's impossible there, then this is something of a lesser degree. So by default, it has to be impossible as well, right? So he says this is the response to those people. And then it would be the only response that they could possibly essentially give is to say that the power of a contingent thing has the ability to cause an effect or to create something out of nothing. And we responded to this in detail. So Imam al-Ghazali says that we've already essentially discussed that. We've already disproven that this is possible. How is it impossible? Because it would necessitate two doers coming together on one single action from the same angle of this ta'alluq, from that connection of the attribute to the thing. The angle would be the exact same, and this would be something impossible, right? Brother Suleiman, I remember you had a question in the last class. I believe it was about why can we not say essentially that Allah with his power creates, for example, 50% of our actions, and we with our power create 50%. Is that the question that you asked? If it is, let me know, and then I'll try and respond to that right now before we finish off. Yes, okay. So the answer to this question is very simple. It's what we discussed with regards to Allah's oneness. Okay. I just had to read the question again, and then it clicked, because it was, what's it called? It's very, it's the exact same thing with regards to Allah's oneness. Why we say that Allah's, the universe, there can't be two Allahs that have power. and then they share on this one action. As in, one did 50, one did 50. Why? Because of burhanut tamanu', and we discussed that in detail previously. So what if there's something unclear there, which you should know burhanut tamanu', because I know you, and so you should know that should be something that is min al-badihiyat. It should be something like common sense to you by now. So burhanut tamanu' is the reason why two things with Qudrah, with power, cannot come together on one action. That's the answer I came up with. My brain is burhanut tamanu' in my brain. Okay, good. So that's it. So that's what it is. Some of these questions, sometimes you just have to ponder ponder upon the question, think about it a little bit, and then you come to a conclusion. Yes. So that's essentially the answer. Okay. Okay. Then he says, what else does he say? Right. So he says that if somebody wants to make this argument that the movement of the hand is what caused the effect of the movement of the water, it would first be befitting of them to argue intellectually that it's possible for a Qudrah, a person's contingent power, to be able to create something. If they prove that, okay, Allah's eternal power can create this thing, and a human's contingent power can create this thing, then after they've established this, after they establish that you can have, more than one type of power, contingent and non-contingent and eternal, and they're both able to create something, then you can start to argue of other things possibly creating something. Okay. But as long as you can't even prove that something with power, when power is supposed to be, what does it mean to have power? It means that you're able to do that thing. So power is what's supposed to mean that you can do that thing. So he's saying, if you can't even establish that contingent power is able to create something out of nothing, then how are you even thinking to argue that some other type of accident, such as movement is its own accident? It's like arguing the color blue creates the color red. So, wait, what? How does the color red come out of the color blue when the color blue is an accident itself that cannot create something, right? Because it doesn't have its own type of power. Make sense? So this is the answer to that argument. And by this, we will conclude the discussion of Imam al-Ghazali on the attribute of Allah's power, of Allah's Qudrah. Okay. And he summarizes it. He says that to summarize this entire attribute, he says, essentially, we argue that all created things, okay, in terms of substances or particles and their accidents, things that have a life like animals and stuff, and also things that don't even have life to begin with, like rocks and stuff like that, like mountains and rocks. These things don't even have life. He says all of this, essentially, to summarize, the entire universe, okay, is existent due to the power of Allah. It came as a result of the power of Allah, okay? And he is the only one who is described as the one who can create this thing, or who has created everything from nothing, because creation is to come to exist after not having existed, right? So Allah is the only one who does this, and it is not that some of these existences that exist come as a result of some of our power causing an effect in something else, as in we can't cause effects in something else. Okay. And now with the famous example, because you'll find like I'm not sure if you guys were able to review last week's lesson, Bismillah, or the last lesson that we did, but I had in the recording I had put in that video clip of one of the popular kind of Salafis, where they argue, or they try and mock the Ash'ari position, and they say this idea that, Ash'aris believe if you go and kill somebody with a gun, right, you shoot them in the head and they die, then you're able to simply say that the gun is not what killed them and I didn't kill them, but rather Allah willed for that person to die, and his will corresponded with the bullet happening to just enter his head. So the bullet, and in other words, what he's trying to say is that the bullet entering the person's head is not what killed this person. Me shooting the gun, pulling the trigger, is not what launched that that bullet. Okay. As in, if Allah wanted to, that bullet would have launched whether I pulled the trigger or not. Okay. So he's trying to mock the Ash'ari position by saying that this is what we actually believe, when this is actually not the case. Okay. As in, it is the sunnah of Allah that when this happens, this happens. When this happens, it's that Allah wills for this to happen every time this happens. So every time a fire is lit and paper is put on it, it's Allah's will that the fire is going to turn to ash. Okay. When when a person pulls the trigger to a loaded gun, it's Allah's will that the reaction happens and it hits the gunpowder and it releases from the shell and it shoots out, right? This is Allah's will. And this is Allah's will as part of His sunnah that He created in this world. So now, what our argument is that it's not the person who is creating this action from nothing. Rather, it's Allah who creates this action from nothing. Okay? As in, if I took a fire and I put a piece of paper on top of that fire, question, when that paper eventually, after a few seconds or minutes or whatever, it turns into ash. If you collect that ash and you put the ashes under a microscope, and you see that the ash is made up of certain atoms, and before that, you took a paper and you put the paper under a microscope and you saw the paper is made up of certain atoms, you can see that the two atoms are different. The atoms of ash, the atoms that make up ash, is different from the atoms that make up a piece of paper. They're different. Question, was the fire knowledgeable of the atoms of paper such that it detected and sensed that, okay, that's a paper. I'm going to turn those atoms from that into this. This is what I want it to be. Was that the doing of the fire? Or was that the doing of Allah? We say it's the doing of Allah. Because in order to create something or cause something, there has to be knowledge beforehand. How can you say that something caused this change, but you didn't know anything about that change to begin with, right? So this is why we say that it's Allah who creates at the time of the relationship between these two things. So when fire touches a piece of paper, Allah creates the burning effect. What is the burning effect? Essentially, the change of, or the destruction of some atoms and the creation of new atoms. Okay. So from this, it should be clear, hopefully now, that when we say that Allah is the doer of all things, it includes things that people do. Okay, everything that a human does, Allah is the one who is creating that action. And this is known in the verse where Allah says, "Wallahu khalaqakum wa ma ta'malun." Allah has created you and that which you do, your actions. Okay. Let me just read some of these comments here. I'm just itching for the lesson on will. The will is a detailed discussion. So inshallah, it'll take a few lessons to get through. They are hypocrites because why don't they apply this to Allah's words? It was not you believers who killed them, but it was Allah who did so. وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. When you took the sand and you threw it in the faces of the kuffar, you weren't the one who threw, but it was rather Allah who threw. Right? So this is Allah very clearly saying that He's the creator of these actions. It's not you who's doing anything. Right? And so from this, it is possible for Allah to not create something, even if the cause that we know scientifically is there. So when the fire was lit and Ibrahim a.s. was put in, Allah was able to completely stop that effect from happening. Why? Because Allah creates the effect at the time of it happening. So now if Allah chooses not to create that effect, I'm sorry, but no matter what you try and do, the fire is not going to burn. That's why everyone's astonished. How is the fire not burning Ibrahim alayhi salam? What is this? Right? So when Allah says to the fire, Kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. In other words, don't cause this type of effect. And He decreed that this effect is not going to be caused. Whereas it was previously written as part of the sunnah of Allah that this effect would happen if a human was put into fire. Right? Same thing with all other types of miracles. It's part of the sunnah of Allah that such and such does not happen. But what is a miracle is when the normal thing that would necessitate this effect, the normal cause that would necessitate this effect, is broken. And the effect comes without the cause, or the cause is found but the effect is not found. Example of these two, you'll have the cause but you won't have the effect. Like, for example, the fire in Ibrahim alayhi salam. You have the cause, which is the fire, but you don't have burning, which is the effect. Or you'll have the effect without the cause, such as when the Prophet ﷺ splits the moon with his fingers. Normally, the cause for splitting the moon, you'd have to take a huge, gigantic machine and go to the moon and physically split it in half, and then grab one side, grab the other side, and pull them apart. That would be the cause to that effect, right? But Allah caused that effect to happen without that means. Okay. So this is what it means to say that Allah is the one who creates these actions. So with the example that the scholar gave in the video clip that I put, where he gave the example of a person shooting another person, it was by Allah's creation that when a person chooses that he wants to pull his finger backwards like this, and it is linked with a trigger there, right? And the trigger is constructed within a gun with the proper, physics and everything, such that when it's pulled, it hits the gunpowder of the bullet casing, and the gunpowder, it's known that when it's hit with a certain amount of force or something, it explodes. And it's known that when something explodes, it means that it pushes the properties of the thing that's there, it pushes it far away from it. So if we constrict that into a shell and leave only a little bullet in front, it means that all that force will go to that bullet. And then if we restrict that into a long pipe, right, a long cylinder, then there's no way for it to go here or there. It's going to go straight. Okay, if it goes straight and I point it somewhere, then wherever it points, that's where it's going to go. All of this is known with the sunnah of Allah, with Allah's creation. Who created all of these laws? Allah created all of these laws. So when a person pulls the trigger, it's Allah who does all of these things. Why is the person responsible? Because he willed to, and despite knowing that this is what's going to come out of it. He knew that this is all the law of Allah. He knew that this was the sunnah of Allah. He knew this is how Allah has created and designed things in this world. He knew these were the physics that go into the usage of a gun. He knew all of these things. And he knew that when he pulls that trigger, it's pretty much going to kill this person. And he chose to do it. That's what he's responsible for. Is he now responsible for everything else that comes between all that? No, he can't be. Why? Because between him shooting and the guy dying, there is a whole bunch of actions that took place. If he was the creator of all those actions, he should have, and the punishment for him shooting this gun is whatever, then he should have a punishment for each and every one of these actions that led to this person dying. Because this person only died because of this action, and that action only happened because of that action, and that action only happened because of that. So everything, he should be responsible for all of it. He should have that many sins leading up to that point. Okay, but everything in between, we don't say that was his doing, right? The gun, the shape of it, everything from the existence of his finger on the trigger till when that person dies, right, has nothing to do with the person. The person is not the creator of those things, right? So now if Allah wills, that person will live. If Allah wills, that person will die. If Allah wills, when he shoots it, there will be a super, super strong wind at the exact moment that it pushes the bullet this way. If Allah wills, the flash will come into existence and go and relocate the bullet. There's so many possibilities that could happen from the time when he pushes the trigger to that person dying, right? So he's not the creator of these actions. He's not the creator of that person's death. He's not the creator of the guns. So all of this, we say, all of this is the creation of Allah. But he's responsible for it still. So this is where the understanding of that individual was mistaken. Okay. And this is the end of the attribute of Allah's power. We'll begin, just because we started a little bit late. We still have a few minutes on the recording left before we reach the hour. So we'll begin on the attribute of Allah's, this is the second attribute of Allah's essence, which is Allah's eternal knowledge.